we have Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal joining us, who is our champion of H.J.R.48, as well as so many more accomplishments throughout your career, including being the chair of the Progressive Caucus, Medicare for All Caucus, LGBTQIA plus Equality Caucus, so many more things that you're a part of. So we're honored that you're part of also this democracy movement. And yeah, just wanted to welcome you and thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be with you all today. And, this is always I still remember several years ago when I was with you in person, and it was so great to see the movement from around the country. I want to thank Move to Amend for hosting such an important conversation and really for your tireless work to organize and advocate for social and economic justice. And I just want to say one thing clearly right off the bat. Corporations are not people and money is not speech. Since the misguided 2010 Citizens United Supreme Court ruling, dark money groups have funneled nearly $1 billion into our election system. And the 2020 election easily became the most expensive election in American history. It was more than double the total cost of the record-breaking 2016 election cycle. So this is going in completely the wrong direction. And this money makes elected officials beholden to corporations, to billionaires, to their wealthiest donors. And even when they may not be completely influenced by the money, the trust that people put in us is compromised when they think that we might be more beholden to money and when they know that our real job is to work for the people. So that's why for me, from the minute that I announced that I was running for Congress 7 years ago now, I pledged that I would not take any corporate PAC contributions. In fact, at the time that I did that, I was one of only a very tiny handful of members of the House who did not take corporate PAC money. Today, I'm happy to say that we have over 70 members of Congress who don't take corporate PAC money. And our Congressional Progressive Caucus PAC, which I also now co-chair, does not take corporate PAC contributions. So we are making progress, but unfortunately, there is still way too much money in our elections and too much deference that's given to corporations as if they were people. When it comes to getting dark money out of politics, the American people actually agree with us. More than 75% of people say that there should be limits on the amount of money that individuals and organizations can spend on campaigns. And 90% of people say that it's important that donors don't have more influence than others in our political system. So keeping this money out of politics means reestablishing trust with voters and changing the system. And it really is a matter of racial and economic justice. We live in a country where the richest 1% of Americans own more than 30% of the nation's wealth. And we know that the wealth gap is particularly staggering for Black and brown families. White families have an average wealth that's more than 14 times as much as Black families. And with a Supreme Court ruling that makes money equivalent to speech, people of color will inevitably be silenced by millionaires and billionaires. So the We the People Amendment, which I proudly plan to reintroduce in the 118th Congress, would finally return power to the people and corporate constitutional rights, reverse Citizens United, and ensure that our democracy really is of the people, by the people, and for the people, not corporations. So very simply, the amendment says that corporations are not people, money is not free speech. It clearly states that inalienable rights belong to human beings only, not artificially created corporate entities, and that campaign contributions are not a form of free speech and must be regulated. As Supreme Court Justice Stevens said in 2010, corporations have no consciences, no beliefs, no feelings, no thoughts, no desires. They are not themselves members of we the people. by whom and for whom our Constitution was established. So my We the People amendment ensures that politicians aren't beholden to big pharma, big tech, or big oil. It ensures that every single voice is heard in this country. And whether you make minimum wage or you run a Fortune 500 corporation, your vote and your voice are equal. And that we all have a say in who represents us. So thank you so much for your work. Continuing this fight together, I truly believe we have the ability to move the needle on this critical, necessary work and create an election system that is fair and just.
Absolutely. And what you were saying, I agree, it's rebuilding that trust by ensuring that our voices are heard in our politics. And I want to remind the attendees, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and I'll, go ahead and give you some our way. So the first question that I saw was, how do you see H.J.R. 48 relating to other progressive initiatives right now? So you mentioned a lot yourself, about how all of these are connected. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can look at any issue that we're fighting for. You can think about minimum wage, and you can think about the Green New Deal. You can think about Medicare for all. Any one of these issues has a set of corporate interests that are putting more and more money into the system, electing people based on whether or not they support that corporate interest instead of the people's interest or the constituents' interest, and pouring money into ad campaigns, to many of which are just lies and falsehoods, but they're plastered all over television. But even if you think about our democracy and you think about the corporations that have funded candidates who still have not denounced January 6th, who still don't believe that the insurrection was real, who still have not said that Joe Biden is the legitimate president, you actually go to not just the issues that we're fighting for, which are all part and parcel of building a just democracy, but you go to the idea of democracy itself. So how can we allow this to continue? And that's why, the Progressive Caucus, but also the Democratic Caucus, our first bill that we passed when we took control was the For the People bill, which really was a piece of legislation, expansive piece of legislation that began to get at many of these pieces. I think this amendment, the We the People amendment, is a very simple, clear statement of exactly what we believe, and really to point out that our founding framers were not anticipating, I am sure, were not anticipating that corporations would be treated as people, that there would be the kind of money to destroy the ability for us to have justice and democracy in our country. Because when you think about so many of these things, they are what the people want, whether they're Republicans or Democrats or independents. The polling for minimum wage, the polling around people wanting universal health care, all of these things are what people want. And yet we're being stymied by lobbyists, by corporate lobbyists, by the hundreds that are at our doors, and by the money that is actually put into elections and subverting elections.
Absolutely. I read something somewhere. If you just sit back and look around your room, you'll find at least 5 different corporate logos somewhere. Yeah. So, how can we say that corporations aren't involved in our politics? It's just something I was thinking about when you were saying, yeah. So another question I see is, what do you think will help gain support for H.J.R. 48 in this 118th Congress?
Well, I come to this work as an organizer. So I spent 15, 20 years before coming to Congress working to organize and advocate. And I really believe it's about the movements we build in districts. And that's why I'm so grateful to Move to Amend, because you as a constituent can make an enormous difference. If we can amplify your voices in districts, the single most important thing to getting co-sponsors on a resolution like this one is for constituents to reach out to their elected officials and to say, we want you to co-sponsor this legislation, and we will explain to you why it's so important, right? Why it goes against everything that you say you believe in, that we believe in, that you're trying to do for the district, to allow the system to continue. So I think being persuasive, being organized, bringing more people into the Move to Amend movement, and really targeting, building groups of advocates in the district who understand the issue, who understand ways to communicate your personal story, and which is always so compelling to an elected official, to be able to say, these are the reasons why this is so important to us. That ultimately is really what I think gets co-sponsors for a piece of legislation. There are hundreds of pieces of legislation introduced every single day. And the reality is often we don't even, as elected officials, even though I will do my own advocacy within Congress, I will send out letters asking, for co-sponsors to get on when we introduce the bill. And I have been doing that. There is nothing more compelling than creating the movement in the field to really push for those co-sponsors.
Absolutely. Like they say, if you don't have money power, you better have people power.
That's right. Exactly. Exactly.
Well, I know you're on a tight schedule, so I just wanted to say thank you again for championing this and for all of your other work. And, we'll continue to build that people power, push people to be co-sponsors, and, anything you need from us, let us know. We're always here for you. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. And just stay at it. It makes me so hopeful every time I see people across the country who understand how important this is. So I'm really proud to champion this piece of legislation.
Thank you. And it also makes us very proud to see people in our elected officials also support the things that we need and want as, constituents. So
absolutely. All right.
Awesome.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you so much again. And for everyone else, feel free to stick on the channel. We will be going through a few more things, just, any questions that you all had that weren't addressed. I know we only got to a few questions. And also, before anyone goes, I want to mention that we have a lobby training this February 7th. That's going to be a Tuesday at 5 p.m. Pacific time. So I will put that link in the chat. Hopefully y'all can see it. Perfect. And please put that on your calendars, RSVP on our website. We're going to help you get the tools that you need in order to lobby your congressperson, your elected officials, and also build that people power where you are. So yeah, want to take a few questions. We just want to make sure that everyone knows about that training and would like to join. And I'm going to pass it along to my colleague, Greg, to talk about this resolution and compare it to another one that you might have been seen floating around. So yeah, please feel free to stick around and send us your questions, and we'll answer as we go along. Thanks.
Well, greetings, everyone. Appreciate you taking the time to be here. I am going to briefly go over, this may not be the best version. Let me open up. Here we go.
Greg, I have to say, you need some folders in there.
I do have I have a few, just a few. Sort of commensurate to how my brain is functioning. But anyway, appreciate all of you being on this call, taking the time during the middle of the day or late morning. And one of the things that we wanted to make sure that all of you, and hopefully all of you, have come to this call, not just to sort of learn a little bit and see Pramila Jayapal and some inspiration, but also be willing to devote some perspiration to this cause by, in the next month or two, what Representative Jayapal did not say is that we are awaiting, because we always pick the number 48 for branches, for this amendment, as opposed to other interests who, hey, when it's time to introduce something, we introduce it, and you get whatever number is next. Sort of like going to any driver's bureau and picking the number and waiting for that to come up. We intentionally wait for the 48 to come up. Right now, only 21, as of a couple of days ago, House Joint Resolutions have been introduced in Congress. So we have to wait for 20 some more to happen before 48 comes up, which we've sort of reserved. And when that happens, which Representative Jayapal's office has said will be, maybe early April, we got to wait. But we just refuse to kind of twiddle our thumbs. We need to kind of get prepared for that. So those of you who are interested in being a part of this and being active in this, certainly join this webinar on the 7th of February. But an important piece of becoming active and a constituent to form a delegation of people to meet with the Congress person's aide, whoever your congressperson may be, is to get on the other side of the learning curve about these issues. We know many of you are already there, but we always need to be refined and updated. And one of the important updates is this other constitutional amendment that's been introduced. It's called the Democracy for All Amendment, which has been introduced in Congress's sessions, at least the 117th and sort of something like it in the 116th, but it's back. It has a new number. It's now H.J.R. 13. It has a new prime sponsor or original sponsor. As you can see, that being Representative Adam Schiff. So one thing right off the bat, to be clear, and to avoid any confusion, is that some of you may know that Representative Schiff in the last couple of Congresses has introduced his own constitutional amendment. That is different from this. We don't think he's going to introduce that other amendment that was very modest. It only had a couple of co-sponsors. Rather, he was asked by I think it was the outgoing Representative Deutsch, who was the primary sponsor, to take over. So it's Adam Schiff, who is now the prime sponsor, the original sponsor. And this is called H.J.R. 13. It's so called outside of Congress. Inside of Congress, it's called H.J.R. 13. But outside of Congress, in the movement, so to speak, it's called the Democracy for All Amendment. It was introduced the 9th. And we put together this chart because when you approach your congressperson, they will probably already be pretty familiar with this, at least to the extent of maybe having already co-sponsored it. As of a couple of days ago, there were already something like 70, 80 co-sponsors. Many of them co-sponsored H.J.R. 1, the Democracy All Amendment, in the last Congress. So it's important when they say, oh, I've already co-sponsored that, thanks very much, you can go and meet somebody else, to say, well, you may be confusing H.J.R. 13 with our proposed amendment, H.J.R. 48. So we put together this chart as something both for your benefit, but also once you become familiar with this, with other materials that Move to Amend will develop, to pass along to those aides you meet, to make sure they understand the differentiation between the two and understand, as need to be underscored, that H.J.R. 48, the We the People Amendment, is much more comprehensive, much more compelling, will be much more effective at abolishing all corporate constitutional rights and eliminating big money in elections by ending the equally bizarre notion that money is free speech. And here's how it does. It does it. I'm just going to go through this very quickly. We can put in the link or in the chat somewhere a link to you, or at least everyone who is signed on to this call. We have that information. We can send that out. But just for now, here's what it says. So section 1, you can follow this cursor. So what we've done is just done sort of a side-by-side comparison of the sections in both of these amendments. There is no equivalent to section 1 of the Democracy for All Amendment. Why? Because section 1 basically is the section of the We the People Amendment that says only a human being should have constitutional rights. A corporation is not a person. And there is no equivalent notion of that in the Democracy for All Amendment. So these sections here, all of these three sort of pieces of it, the rights protected of the Constitution by the Constitution are the rights of natural persons only, artificial entities established by the laws of any state, etc. And the privileges of artificial entities shall be determined by the people through federal, state, or local law and shall not be construed to be inherent or inalienable. There is, as you can see, nothing in the Democracy for All Amendment that relates or connects or is equivalent to that. So that's an easy one. Section 2, preceding this section of the We the People Amendment, is this statement of intent to sort of lay out the overarching or undergirding sense of what it is we're trying to accomplish, to ensure that all citizens, regardless of their economic status, have access to the political process, and that no person gains, as a result of their money, substantially more access or ability to influence in any way the elections of any candidate for public office or any ballot measure. So Section 1 deals with corporate constitutional rights. Section 2 gets at the other bizarre notion of political money in elections being defined as free speech. This equally gets abolished. So there is no equivalent sort of aspirational statement laying this out. What there is this Section 1 of the Democracy for All Amendment that reads, Congress and the states may regulate and impose reasonable viewpoint neutral limitations on the raising and spending of money by candidates and others to influence elections, okay? As opposed to the equivalent part in Section 2 after our sort of aspirational statement, or maybe a goal, you can think about it as that being that federal, state, and local governments shall regulate, limit, or prohibit contributions and expenditures, including a candidate's own contributions and expenditures. The operative difference between these two sections is what we have, and we've taken the liberty of accentuating what is in each of these by underlining certain key words. In the Democracy for All Amendment, the operative word is may. In the We the People Amendment, it's shall. May is quite different than shall, is it not? Shall compels, shall forces, shall says you will do. May is possibly, conceivably, may not. Who knows? It provides this unbelievable amount of options that Congress may or may not do, which, as we often have said, is why quite quickly, without much real selling job, many Congress people quite quickly sign up to become a co-sponsor, because it doesn't, even if this passes, it doesn't force them or compel them to do really anything. It provides this option. And so, as we say, this language here is mandatory. So what this part in italics is the part of the section of this chart that has the quotation marks is actually the verbatim from the amendment itself. What is here in italics is our interpretation or explanation or justification or description from our standpoint. And so, as we say, the language is not mandatory, shall is mandatory, may is optional. And it would allow the courts to decide by having this sort of open-endedness. It means the courts, in essence, decide what is reasonable, given courts now would even have post this amendment, we believe, even greater power. And this language does not expressly give local governments the power to regulate, limit, or prohibit a candidate's own contributions and expenditures. So that's with that. There's only just a little bit more. Again, Section 2 or Section 1 of their amendment basically just has that point alone. Our Section 2, which addresses money in politics and prohibits and ends and abolishes corporate constitutional rights, does so by also affirming these two pieces, that federal, state, and local government shall require that any permissible contribution and expenditure be publicly disclosed. So ours calls for transparency. There is no equivalent provision in the Democracy for All Amendment, dark money, which is political spending by organizations that don't have to disclose their donors through things like 501c4 organizations, would continue to flow to unknown candidates and ballot measures. because there is not provision as there is in the democracy in the We the People Amendment. And lastly, the judiciary shall not construe the spending of money to influence elections to be speech under the First Amendment. So we're making sure that that the judiciary, that the Supreme Court, that lower courts will not have this bottom line power to define money being defined as First Amendment protection, free speech. Again, there is no equivalent provision in the Democracy for All Amendment. The Supreme Court will be free to interpret, as they have done very liberally, so many other amendments and provisions of the Constitution. So the Supreme Court would be free to redefine speech to who knows, given the constellation of characters on the court, for example, likely, maybe inevitably, to further serve the interests of corporate entities and or frustrate the sections of this amendment. All right, so section 2 of their piece, Democracy for All Amendment, first one just says Congress and the states may regulate and impose reasonable limits. Section 2 says Congress and the states may regulate and enact systems of public campaign financing. Many of you are very familiar with public financing. It's now in some place, but it has to be voluntary because it cannot be mandatory, because that would violate money being defined as free speech and the ability of candidates to spend their own money in elections. So this language is not mandatory, again, because it says may. And second, the public financing, which many people in Move to Amend think is a good idea, is just as much possible under H.J.R. 48 as it is under H.J.R. 1, probably more likely, because once money is no longer defined as free speech, it's abolished. Now then, communities at the local, state, and federal level have, without any concerns of there being this mayness out there, be able to, if they so choose, to enact systems of public financing. All right, section 3 then. Congress and the states shall have the power to implement and enforce this article by appropriate legislation. Okay, so what they're saying is, all right, Congress now will be compelled to have the power to implement and enforce everything that follows. But what follows? What follows is that they may distinguish between natural persons and corporations or other artificial entities created by law, including prohibiting such entities from spending money to influence elections. So this one is, I don't know about you, but to me, weirdly worded, because on the first hand, all right, it gets off to a good start. It says that everything in this article is compelled to be done, but then immediately sort of flips and says, well, Congress may distinguish when they're talking about money in politics between natural persons and corporations. Well, again, if it's may, they may not distinguish. So it's quite possible that there will be absolutely, precisely, and exactly nothing that Congress would do that would deal with corporate money in elections. And so just to underscore this, Congress and the states are not required to distinguish between natural persons and corporations and other artificial entities. To take away from this, that's very clear cut. And local government is not empowered to implement and enforce the amendment if the federal and state government fail to do so. You know, constitutionally, localities have no constitutional powers. They only have powers that the states have given them through things like home rule. So if the Constitution and our amendment to the Constitution allows this sort of open, loophole that a truck, a dump truck or a Mack truck can drive through pertaining to the federal level and the state level, by definition, local governments will not have any ability to, on their own, since there is no constitutional power at the local level, to try to rein in this compelling way money in politics. And lastly, section 3 in our amendment, section 4 in theirs, just basically says, hey, nothing in this amendment shall be construed to abridge freedom of the press. And there's pretty much exact wording in section 4. So sorry for taking up so much time, but it's really important that we understand the difference, because some of our friends who we may reach out to, who need to be educated on this, may believe that these two amendments are pretty much one and the same or interchangeable, and they are not. So if they've already endorsed H.J.R.13, okay? But it should be absolutely no reason why, if they really truly believe in money being defined as free speech and really truly believe they want to abolish all corporate constitutional rights, then there really and truly is only one choice, and that's H.J.R. 48.
All right, thank you so much, Greg, for that. I also want to remind those watching that we do have all this material on our website if you want to look back on it. A few questions regarding this. Congresswoman Jayapal is also one of the main sponsors of H.J.R. 13. Should we be supporting both resolutions? Even though H.J.R. 48 is a stronger resolution, what are the downsides of supporting both? And also, there was another question surrounding the rights of nature. After We the People Amendment becomes law, how would this help codify rights of nature? So we'll start off with those two questions and kind of go from there.
Well, I could try the one, and certainly everybody is willing to take their tab at stab at rights of nature. You know, I think the major downside of this is both inside Congress and outside Congress. Inside Congress is, again, this question of, again, Congress people, they have to be sort of Jacks and Jills of all issues, and they know a little bit of a lot of issues. That's why oftentimes when we do meet with people, when we say, hey, we're going to meet with our congressperson and we're left with meeting with an aide, we feel down and all and think, oh, I'd love to meet with the congressperson. But oftentimes, actually, quite honestly, meeting with the aide is better, because they, especially if it's the right aide and it's the aide that deals with sort of that subset of the congressional agendas, because they focus in on this. And so what's important, and what the sort of downside or the challenge is, that the confusion associated with this, because they're dealing with so many issues on so many levels, and they're operating, you know, keeping all these balls at once in the air at once. It's like, okay, you know, there's only so much headspace for addressing issues around constitutional change, which oftentimes is seen as not immediate and as crisis oriented as so many other issues right before them. Though we feel this is sort of at root behind so many of the individual crises that Congress people are responding and reacting and resisting to. So the challenge and the downside is that they would confuse the one with the other, or think that they're just sort of, you know, the same. And it's certainly fine and certainly permissible. I would say certainly not something we want to encourage them to do, because we're trying to get people educated and aware, and they're not going to learn this stuff on their own. It's up to us to do it. And quite honestly, those of you who meet with your congressional aides are going to know more about this issue than about 95% of them. You will be the educators. You will be the teachers. You will be the enablers. You will be the facilitators, because, you know, their job is to sort of know and catch up on immediately what's happening, and they'll, you know, look at this issue 5 minutes or 10 minutes, 15 minutes before you meet with them, with rare exceptions, and there are some exceptions. So that's the challenge inside Congress, is that these people may feel they're exactly the same, or pretty much the same, or different colors of the same whatever, and feel that they've already sort of done their job in this domain of constitutional amendments addressing money and politics. And that's how they frame it, as we have to deal with money and politics, get big money out of Congress, and that corporate rule begins and ends with money and politics, and doesn't address all these other ways that corporate constitutional rights have harmed people, places, and the planet. Outside Congress, of course, the challenge and the problem with this, it's confusing, particularly with Pramila Jayapal being sort of an original co-sponsor. So Adam Schiff, as you can see again on this chart, he's the original sponsor, but there are three sort of original co-sponsors, one of whom is Pramila Jayapal. And the reason she told us, as some of you may already know, Congress is in general an institution, the Senate even more, the House to somewhat a lesser extent, where the gentlemen and the gentlewomen sort of come together, and even though they may have ideological differences, they try, though that obviously has changed somewhat, if not a great deal over the last year or two, to treat one another with proper decorum and with proper respect and all. And they will, out of habit sometimes, to sort of support one another, particularly if they're working in general on the same general thing. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. So it was sort of under that kind of mood and spirit that they reached out to Dahl. You may want to say something about that. That she said, yeah, I was asked by Schiff if I'd be an original co-sponsor, and yeah, why not? It's not going to really harm anything at this point. So the big problem with that outside is that people stretch, well, wait a second, isn't Jayapal sort of the main person for this? Why is she supporting that? And I think the response to people who do say that, who do ask that, is simply to just say she is the main champion of H.J.R.48, and just out of respect is endorsing as a co-sponsor of H.J.R.13. And we hope, and we've actually asked her, that we hope that she will ask Schiff and others who are co-sponsors and original co-sponsors and other sponsors of H.J.R.13 to become co-sponsors of H.J.R.48. And Schiff did become a co-sponsor last session of 48.
All right, so some of the, I won't say verbatim, some of the Q&A, but a lot of questions have been coming up about what about the Senate? How about a Republican-run House? What do we see as a good strategy moving forward? And I can answer that if you like.
And then if we could circle back to the second part of what was asked before about rights of nature.
Oh, right. Okay. So I think a great place to start would be coming to our lobby training. We're going to go really in depth about what options we have with what representatives we are constituents in. So, you know, a lot of the efforts we make, we don't want to be in vain either. So I think one of the strategies is to look at who has both introduced and supported similar bills. Are they in similar caucuses, etc., and going from there for these representatives. So far left and far right and everyone in between, I saw that being mentioned in a Q&A. I think it's strategizing and knowing who is going to be worth the efforts, but also creating that narrative, that storytelling is a powerful part of convincing our representatives. Like the Congresswoman said, that is what can get to the core of their decisions. Of course, also thinking about the politics of co-sponsoring each other's bills, etc. So just wanted to answer some of those. Hopefully that was, that helped. And then let's go circle back around to rights of nature.
Hey, Jenny, you want to respond to that?
Yes, what was the full question? I'm sorry, I dropped off, so that question's no longer in my question and answer
No worries.
box. And
So
I was
it's
responding to one of the
if we the
questions.
people amendment becomes law, how would this help codify rights of nature?
Well, of course, ideally, we would have that introduced. I do apologize. My internet is a little bit unstable, but not having corporate constitutional rights would automatically put the power in the people's hands to pass legislation like that, and to explore those things. So we know that corporations are using their constitutional rights to come into communities and, plow down little forests. You can't stop them from doing that because of they're exercising their constitutional rights. There's also preemption and monies, the chilling effect of them suing communities that will not allow them to come in and do some of their extraction work and doing stuff like that. There are some laws that are coming out that are giving rights to nature, but those, are unstable as long as corporations have rights. But should they have rights over corporations? Absolutely. They are living, right?
Yeah, I mean, once the amendment passes, now all of a sudden the fossil fuel corporations, for example, don't have the same ability to influence, buy, rent, lease, or retain public officials, and it becomes much more possible to certainly protect, but not just protect nature, but to ensure a livable world by moving more culturally toward saying we need to codify and ingrain into our very core values. And that's what constitutions are, right? Constitutions are not just something sort of at a superficial level, but they are the very essence. They are meant to be kind of taking the best aspirations of our values and codifying them into the corest forms of society. That's hard to change. And so, rights of nature become something not only that is more possible in the sort of public sphere, in our media and in our culture, but also hopefully becomes, legalized and constitutionalized.
And then there's been a lot of questions about someone actually, I'll mention this. Someone had a question of how can I get the Free the People from Corporate Rule poster that Mr. Coleridge has in the background?
We have them. I don't know if they're for sale. I think they are. I love that poster. And we have small cards too, postcards, other size cards, and I think maybe even stickers. So do you know, Jenny, are these posters available in our store? They should be. I think we still, they were put together
I think we still have
specifically.
some, yeah.
Yeah, they were put together specifically for one of our annual conferences, but I think they're great. And everybody should have one in their front windows.
And a lot of questions are about the Senate, if there's any prospects for companion bills.
Yeah, we have, and I see a question about, Bernie, we approached Bernie at a town hall meeting in California, said, of course, I support that. Bernie is like all these public officials, right? In fact, every sort of person of importance has gatekeepers. And Bernie, when he, spoke to a Move to Men supporter one-on-one, yeah, I'll do it. Then when we followed up, we ran into those gatekeepers and just have not been able to penetrate or pierce through them. So to what extent that is a reflection of Bernie not truly, sincerely believing versus that person or those persons. And I mean, this has gone on for many, many years. There was one person, and we don't know if he or she is still with Sanders or not, but we just can't seem to get through to him. However, there's a lot of work. Move to Amenders in California have reached out and been working and been trying to soften up Padilla. They are working now preemptively in trying to get Porter, Katie Porter, who is a Move to Amend co-sponsor in the House, who's running for Senate, as is, I think, Barbara Lee, who I don't think is yet formally declared, but she's a co-sponsor, and Adam Schiff, who has formally declared, he's a co-sponsor. So, that would be obviously a years away. People in Move to Amenders in Minnesota have reached out and are working with aides to Senator Klobuchar, Move to Amenders in Georgia with Ossoff, and then we're going to try to get some Move to Amenders in Pennsylvania to reach out to the new senator there, Federer. So that's sort of the prospects there. And just, I see a question from Richard about municipalities. We have now, as some people may know, more than 700 municipalities and states that have passed either ballot initiatives or, municipal past, through city council, town councils and the like, calling for this amendment and calling for abolishing corporate constitutional rights in money is speech. We have over 700 organizations that have endorsed. We have nearly 500,000 individuals that have signed our motion to amend. All of those sort of sectors and all of that information has been used and has been used effectively when we meet with public officials and when we go in and have these virtual calls that hopefully some of you will be a part of, working with Dahl and others. That when you meet virtually with them, it's not just you, the four of you, as powerful as you will be and are, but you're taking with you that information about in that congressperson's congressional district, all of those organizations, all of those municipalities that have endorsed, all those communities that have passed citizen initiatives, all those individuals who live and are likely voters who have signed our motion to amend. So that collectively adds numbers. And if you don't have organized money, you sure as hell better have organized people. And that's what all of this represents. So it has made a difference, absolutely positively in the past, and will only continue in the future.
Awesome. We are heading towards the end of the time here. So
we can go on if people want to. Fine. If there's still questions.
Oh, there's quite a few. I'm trying to combine as many as I can into concise ones. Let's see. I do also, as I'm looking through these questions, want to remind you all that we do have a lot of things on our website, movetoamend.org, and you can go there for different, I saw like people asking questions about what other amendments, if we have a Q&A or FAQ for those. We do. Feel free to look at our website. We put a few links in the chat. I think you all can see what we write. But a comparison of the H.J.R. 48 and 13 that we went over before. We also have, FAQs of things that you might be asked when you approach your representatives. And I mean, more than I can even begin to describe.
Well, just real quick, I mean, somebody on Mac's book asked, if move to amend requires a constitutional amendment, how can a House bill achieve this? Well, actually, within how constitutional amendments happen, as people may know, is twofold. One is through Congress, both branches of Congress, 2/3 of each branch. So 2/3 of the members in the House and in the Senate have to support calling for a constitutional amendment. And that is presented in the form of what's called a House Joint Resolution. And so you may see and run across references to HJRs, that's House Joint Resolutions, and HRs. HRs are what are called House Resolutions. And there is equivalents in the Senate, SJR and SRs. And so when you see things like an HR, and I see George Penn asked about For the People amendment, people, the American Promise Amendment, American Promise, a lot of these inside the Beltway groups are behind the Democracy for All amendment. But the For the People is the For the People Act. That was a bill that was introduced on the first day of Congress 2 years ago that many of you may have gotten behind, know about, was a good piece of legislation that dealt with voting, trying to expand voting rights, dealing with ethnic issues, and dealing with gerrymandering, those three provisions. But that's a bill. That's an act. That's a statute. That's different from the Democracy for All amendment in the We the People amendment. So I don't know if the For the People Act or bill has yet been introduced. I don't think so. So that's the distinction there. And so once passed, as MacBook Studio Pro asks here, through Congress, 2/3, then it goes to the states, and 3/4 of the states have to ratify. So why it's so important, and Representative Jayapal mentioned this, why it's so important to do things at the grassroots. And that's what distinguishes Move to Amend from these other efforts that just throw out an amendment and just try to get people, to endorse congressionally, but there's no pressure from the grassroots. Is the grassroots, people like you. That's the difference. We've got to achieve this to not only pressure Congress, but when the amendment passes through Congress, then you've already established some people at a local level within your community, if not your state, to put pressure on your states then to ratify.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we are a little over time. People are saying thank you, and want to thank you all for joining us today.
Can I just answer real quick? There's a question here. What's the best way to deal with organizations like Common Cause who support a weaker amendment? And hey, I mean, a lot of these groups inside the Beltway, good groups doing good work that we just happen to, disagree with on this issue. I used to be on the board, National Board of Common Cause, and I disagree with them on this issue. They're doing good work. And I think the way to do it is just to, how I do it is say, look, look around. What's going on right now? Whatever your issue is, whatever you're involved in, has it gotten better over time? No, the conditions are worse, probably, in just about every realm possible and conceivable. We are having serious problems, if not crises. Solutions to problems have to be proportionate and in scale. And a lot of what's being proposed through these other amendments just are not equal in scale and in proportion, And so if you have a big problem, you need a big solution. A little problem, you only need a little solution. A massive fundamental problem, you need a massive fundamental sweeping comprehensive solution. That's what the We the People is. So don't give, I would say ignore to the extent the other amendment. Don't even give it oxygen. It's getting a lot of oxygen from people inside the Beltway and all those types. We need to give oxygen to the We the People amendment and show how fundamentally important and necessary it is.
Ashe. So I think that's a great thing to end on. So thank you for that. Very strong. And again, right, we need compelling amendments, especially H.J.R.48, which really gets at the root of the issue. So again, I want to thank everyone for joining us. Thank you for everyone who contributed to the conversation. Sorry couldn't get to all your questions.
We will respond to these questions somehow. How can we do that? Can we, where can we put these? Because I'd like to sort of respond to some of these that we didn't get to.
Sure.
And out of respect, I mean, some people took some effort to list these. So maybe, you know what, we will send out something to everybody who registered for this and try to answer some of that with some of the links as well.
Maybe when we post the webinar, we can have some of the unanswered questions below and answer them there.
Yeah, because I see a question here about judicial review from an anonymous attendee, really important question. And Bill Coble, and I mean some other really good questions. So we'll try to respond.
They are. And thank you. Yeah, I'll save it.
Okay.
And yeah, again, thank you everyone who joined for giving us your questions, your time. And also thank you for organizing with us. Again, if you want to keep in touch, feel free to go to our website, join us again for the lobby training where we're going a little more in depth about strategy and things that we can do to convince our representatives to join our movement. And yeah, thank you again for joining us.
Unstoppable Sound Agency.
They out here stripping our democracy, piece by piece, city by city, state by state, voter ID laws, emergency financial managers, Citizens United. We gotta fight it.
Corporations are not people too. Money is not speech. Man, in fact, it's the root of all
read the Constitution, there seems to be some type of confusion. I thought it said the people were the institution and not the corporations that simply want to use them. The truth is currently a fusion of corporate loot and our government that is outright abusive. People need change. The state, it refuses. They're saying we're mistaken.